On this episode of the CJ Sweat Show, I'm going to tell you why the College Football Playoff Committee got it right last night. We're going to discuss Roger Goodell's extension. Ezekiel, Elliot, by the way, has decided he is discontinuing his appeal. Tyrod Taylor's now been benched by the Bills. College basketball happened last night. We've got Ben King joining us from the E2C Sports Network covering Auburn Athletics. He's our SEC guy. There's Tennessee stuff going on tonight. We are jam-packed, completely loaded, and we start right now. I'm not bringing the bias here. You are.
What they do up there? Brainwash?
Hey, it's not my fault that your team is terrible.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
This is just honest. I'm sorry if it hurts. Oh wait, I'm not really sorry.
Put that coffee down.
You can't stop! Can't stop, won't stop. Where the brakes at? I give him that diddy bop. Like, take that.
This is the CJ Sweat Show. We are now live and brought to you out of Roanoke, Virginia from the good people over at Buyers Auto. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Wednesday evening. We have got a really fun show to get to. Let me know, by the way, if you can hear me, whether or not you're on Spreaker or Facebook, if you have any audio issues. I really rely on you guys to let me know. And tonight, I'm without my co-host Chris Mason. I'm flying solo tonight. Thought about getting a co-host, but I just thought to myself, listen, I want to see if I can carry the show tonight by myself, like I used to do, and it's just going to be really free, a little bit all over the place, but it's going to be fun. And again, Ben King joining us here in about 20 to 25 minutes or so. We're going to bring him on. I'm really excited to bring him back to the podcast. He always does a really good job whenever we've had him on. There's just so much college football stuff to get to. He's going to be really good tonight, I can promise you that. Again, thank you all for making us part of your day. Beautiful Wednesday night. If you're driving around, listening at home, I cannot thank you enough for making us a part of your Wednesday evening. And if you listen to us on the podcast, really appreciate that as well. I get a lot of people telling me, hey, love downloading this on iTunes. If you've got iTunes, Google Play, you can find us on there. We're basically all over the place now. So I want to open the show with this. Sometimes I wonder if, being an American makes me automatically rebellious. And you too, by the way, unless you're listening from overseas. It sounds weird, but our ancestors are the ones who started the Revolutionary War, and they endured the Civil War. Both were conflicts that had to do with rejecting authority and traditions. And so I wonder if having that in our background means our DNA, we're predisposed to immediately rebel to authority. And why do I bring this up? Because if you ever watch any major sports draft, okay, so we'll take the NFL draft, for example. Roger Goodell always gets up and he says, he starts walking to the podium, and, as he's walking up, you will hear every fan start booing him. It always happens. He always gets booed. And it's not just him, by the way, that gets booed. Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, gets booed. Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL, gets booed. Major League Baseball boos their guy. Every commissioner gets booed, and they get some of the harshest criticism of anybody in their sport. It has always been the case. People like to say it's just Goodell. The only reason we talk about Goodell is because the NFL is more popular than any other sport. But watch the draft and you will see them get booed. Honestly, I don't even think people really know what they're booing about. If you're at the NBA draft and you're booing Adam Silver, why? Like, Adam Silver's been the most player-friendly commissioner that has enabled so many different players to be able to have the life that they want, get the endorsements that they want. Like, there's no real reason to ever boo Adam Silver of the NBA. So I've always wondered, why does anybody boo Adam Silver? And people boo Roger Goodell. So Roger Goodell's contract is up right now for an extension. 31 owners have agreed to pay him $50 million a year. Now, people hear that number and they are completely flabbergasted by that number. Let me tell you something. When Roger Goodell took over in the 2006 season, the NFL was popular. It was not this popular, even with the ratings down. And as popular as it was not this profitable. There's only one owner right now in the NFL that's hesitant, Jerry Jones. So why would, by the way, the owner of the Cowboys, Jerry Jones, so why would 31 owners be for this and then one owner be against it? Well, the obvious truth here is Jerry Jones is upset with the Ezekiel Elliott suspension, and Jerry Jones and Roger Goodell have been kind of butting heads over the whole player protest issue that's happened in the NFL. But Roger Goodell, when he was hired, was basically hired to, A, try to avoid controversy. Now, you can argue he hasn't done a great job of that, but his main purpose as commissioner was to make the NFL popular and profitable. And that's exactly what he's done. I don't even necessarily think these NFL ratings are necessarily his fault. Goodell's had to endure, by the way, since he's been there. He's had to endure the incidents with Pac-Man Jones. You remember him? By the way, the crazy player that played for the Cowboys, Pac-Man Jones. He's had to endure Ben Roethlisberger and his issues, Ray Rice punching a girl in an elevator, and now you've got the Colin Kaepernick situation, which I think he's handled marvelously because he's got liberals and conservatives equally upset. And anytime you can get both liberals and conservatives not just upset, but equally upset, I kind of think you're probably doing something right there. Yet through all of that, the league's been incredibly profitable. And even as these TV ratings are down, I looked this up today, ad buys are up. People are still buying ads. But it's funny, we hate authority. And we also hate the College Football Playoff Committee, which last night put out their rankings. And I've never really figured out why people hate the committee either. Like, we get this playoff, finally, the playoff you all have begged for, and now that we've got a committee, which you wanted because you were upset with the BCS rankings, a computer system determining who played for the championship, we now get this committee, and you're all up in arms over the committee. I've argued this before. There is no perfect solution. Yet every single year we've had this playoff, there's been a controversy. 2014, people were upset that Ohio State made the playoff ahead of Baylor and TCU. Yet, Ohio State, as we know, they went on to win the national championship. In 2015, everyone was upset because Iowa, the college football powerhouse, Iowa, wasn't included. Yet Alabama and Clemson proved that year they were easily the best teams in the country. They smoked both teams in the semifinals and then gave us a good championship game. Last year, the big complaint was Penn State. Yet it was obvious that Ohio State and Washington belonged, while Alabama and Clemson were on a completely different level. By the way, Penn State lost to USC in their bowl game. Yet again, after last night, everyone's upset with the rankings. But let's be honest about this. The committee got it right. Alabama's ranked number 1. Any of you really have a problem with that? Alabama, for the past 10 years, has been the best coach, the most dominant team in college football. Are we really complaining that the most dominant team in college football is ranked number 1? They just won on the road against a ranked opponent and had multiple injuries on defense. If that doesn't tell you how good Alabama is, I don't know what else to tell you. Clemson has played the toughest schedule in the country. Again, remember, the committee looks at what teams were ranked at the times you played them. Clemson's played 4 teams that were ranked at the time of those games. They've gone on the road and not just beaten Virginia Tech, physically pushed around Virginia Tech across the field. Now, if you've never watched Virginia Tech games, and most of my listeners have, you know that's typically a pretty physical team. And at the time when Clemson beat them, that was one of the best teams in the country. After that Georgia Tech loss, they may not be as good anymore. But the committee looks at What were your opponents ranked when you played them? Clemson, based off what the committee says they're looking at, has the toughest schedule in the country. Miami's undefeated and has beaten good programs in consecutive weeks. They're third. Any complaints there? And then Oklahoma comes in at fourth. I believe Oklahoma actually is the best team in the country right now. They do not have the best resume, and they do have a lot of questions on defense. So I don't have any problem with Oklahoma being at 4. Wisconsin's the first team out. Are you really upset with Wisconsin being out? They, I don't think, should even be in the conversation. They've played absolutely no one. And then at 6, you've got Auburn, who I think proved themselves after last week. Now, everybody today is out complaining about this. Yet let me give you, remember Paul Harvey used to always say, but here's the other side of the story. So I'm going to give you the other side of the story and tell you what is actually happening with these college football playoff rankings. Because it's really quite simple. Look at 1, 2, and 3. Alabama 1, Clemson 2, Miami 3. Even though those 3 are in different conferences, or at least Alabama's in a different conference than the other 2, the SEC, Alabama, and the ACC, Miami and Clemson, both have something very much in common. ESPN owns the rights to those conference games, which means, by the way, ESPN is having say in these college football playoff rankings. How do I know this? Because right now the rankings don't mean much of anything. Yet ESPN paid $7.3 billion to acquire the rights to host the college football playoff. So why would Alabama, or why would ESPN want those teams to be 1, 2, and 3? Because now ESPN's going to get the Iron Bowl, or I guess that may go to CBS, but ESPN's going to get Alabama games, they're going to get Auburn games, they're getting Clemson games, they're getting Miami games, they're going to get the ACC championship, potentially between 2 playoff contenders, Miami and Clemson. Which means, that $7.3 billion to buy this playoff was not for those 2 playoff games, or those 3 playoff games. It was so ESPN could dictate, have some say in the rankings to make their games more watchable. I don't have any issue with that. But that's the story behind the story. That's why it's no surprise that Oklahoma, who I think is the best team in the country, with one of the better resumes, that's why I think it's no surprise they're at number 4. They're in the Big 12. That's a Fox conference. And Wisconsin in the Big 10, another Fox conference. I don't think there's any surprise with that. I don't have any issue with what ESPN did. But here's what's going to happen with these rankings, if you want to follow this logic, which is, by the way, what I think the committee is going to do. The committee is not going to allow Auburn, Alabama, Miami, and Clemson to play in this Final Four. They will not allow that at all because those are 4 teams from the exact same region, the Southeast. All right, we've had, for the past 2 years in a row, Alabama play Clemson in the national championship game. Last year, although it was a better game, had worse ratings. So the committee doesn't want to allow that to happen, and ESPN does not want 4 teams from the same regions, even if their networks get it. Because once the final rankings come out and the playoff is determined, ESPN doesn't really care. They just want to have a good playoff. So I believe Oklahoma, Ohio State, or Wisconsin will occupy one of those spots, at least one. And if Wisconsin is undefeated, whether or not they deserve it, we'll get into the playoff. Because it then gives ESPN and the college football playoff one region they don't currently have. You don't pay $7.3 billion with a B unless you have some say in what's happening. It's completely obvious. And that's why, by the way, all the Fox guys, I'm listening to Joe Klatt and Colin Cowherd today. Every single one of them are completely upset that Oklahoma's ranked 4 and Wisconsin's ranked 5. If you look at it, it's really not that complicated to figure out. Wisconsin's played nobody, and Oklahoma's in the conversation, but they're not going to get ranked in the top 3 because ESPN has broadcasting rights to this. ESPN guys, by the way, for the most part, are like overjoyous that 3 teams that they get broadcasting rights to are in this conversation. So I just don't think it's that big of a deal. All right. Thank you guys for joining us. Seriously, leave your comments in Facebook Live. We've got JJ leaving pictures of cats in there and eggplant. Don't know really what that is all about. Although I think some of you can probably figure it out. And we've got a lot of people joining in on Facebook Live as well. I can see you all watching. Make sure you leave us comments. Let us know what you think of the college football playoff. Did the committee get it right? All right, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side of this break, Ezekiel Elliott suspended, and Ben King will be joining the podcast. This is the CJ Sweat Show, and we'll be right back. Hey, it's your favorite redhead, CJ. I'm sure by now you've heard my opening rant, CJ Thoughts. Well, let me give you my thoughts on the car buying process. If you're like me, when you go to buy a car, you just want to find something reliable with decent payments. I'm not talking about going to the local guy down the street looking to make a quick sell. Buyers Auto has been around for over 100 years. And they're going to take time to ensure you're buying a car specifically fit for your needs. That's why I'll trust Buyers Auto with the purchase of my next car. Buy your auto from Buyers Auto. CJ Sweat Show back live here on Facebook and on Spreaker and on TuneIn Radio. I told you, you can find us just about anywhere you want to. We are all over the place. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful, by the way, Wednesday evening. It has been a little bit warmer here today, thank goodness. I'm so tired of the cold weather, but it is good to have you in. So one of the things that came across the wire just a little bit ago is Ezekiel Elliott withdraws his appeal. He will serve a 6-game suspension. And, you know, Cowboy fans are like the funniest fans in the world. Like, Cowboy fans are like, we're still going to win because we've got Dak and we've got our defense and we've got Jason Garrett, but we're all upset about the Ezekiel Elliott suspension. He should be playing. Like, pay attention to what people say because you can read between the lines and kind of figure out exactly how they feel. The nervousness Cowboy fans and Jerry Jones showed about the Ezekiel Elliott suspension told you everything. And that is, they weren't comfortable with him being suspended at all. So that's exactly why, by the way, the Cowboys this past weekend without Ezekiel Elliott got smacked by the Falcons. And I like Dak Prescott, but when you take away a running back and you take away one offensive lineman, he's not the same quarterback whatsoever. And so this thing with the Cowboys is interesting because you've got the Rams who look really, really good and the Seahawks who look really, really good. The Vikings and Lions both look like capable playoff teams. And then you've got the Saints and Panthers, which all look really, really good right now. So, like, the Cowboys are in danger of, if they can't get their things together soon, they may not make it into this college football playoff. Or, I'm sorry, the college football playoff. They may not make it into the NFL playoffs. So, again, there's a lot of interesting things to be paying attention to with the Dallas Cowboys. I think that Ezekiel Elliott suspension is a much bigger deal than any of them want to admit. And I think when you look at the reactions by Jerry Jones and you look at the reaction by Cowboy fans regarding this suspension, that tells you everything you need to know. I just thought it was I just think the Cowboys are in a lot of trouble. The other thing, we're going to get into this a little bit more later, but so the Bills came out today and said they're going to start Nathan Peterman, the quarterback from Pittsburgh, that from the Pittsburgh Panthers. He's now a rookie, was drafted this year. They're going to start him over Tyrod Taylor. And I can't for the life of me figure this out. Now, I'm not stat guy. I'm a watch the game guy. But sometimes you got to look at stats as well and kind of pick your poison. Tyrod Taylor with the Bills, not a successful franchise, is 19-18. He's got a winning record with the Buffalo Bills. He's thrown 47 touchdowns and 17 interceptions in his career with the Bills. This year, 10 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. His average quarterback rating is 92.1. The amazing thing about all of that is Tyrod Taylor statistically is the equivalent to Matt Ryan. And I'm not making that up. Go look it up. He statistically is very, very comparable to Matt Ryan. I'm not saying they play the same or anything like that, but they have very similar statistics. And the Bills just sat him. I think it's a big, big mistake. I think anytime you've got a quarterback that does that much winning, sitting him is not a good solution. Okay, we're going to take one more quick break, 30 seconds. We're going to have Ben King on the other side of this break. I appreciate you joining us. We will be right back. This is the CJ Sweat Show.
When I was little, I didn't talk for a long time. I liked things to always be the same. Anything new or different would scare and upset me. I was very sensitive to lights and sounds. It was almost like I had bigger eyes and ears than everyone else. So I built secret hiding places where nothing could get in. I didn't like looking people in the eye. It made me feel uncomfortable. I'd throw big tantrums over little things like when my socks didn't match. Sometimes I'd do the same things over and over. Until one day, I found out I had autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I learned how to live with it better.
You can see signs of autism in children as young as 18 months. Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org/signs. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
Back live is the CJ Sweat Show, the only show where you can potentially hear the initial call and discussion between me and our guest. So joining us now is Mr. Benjamin King. Ben, thanks for being on the podcast again. Always a pleasure to have you with us.
Hey, CJ, it's my pleasure to be here, man. It's an honor. And definitely glad to be here after the last time I was on Saturday 6 because I need to redeem myself on those picks.
Yeah, we got to bring you back on. Ben, I tell you, watching this past weekend, Auburn really took it to Georgia Saturday. Now, I picked Auburn to win, but I said it would be by a point. I did not think we were going to get that. Were you surprised?
No, I wasn't actually. My prediction before him was 41-23, so our defense definitely came out and did a little bit better than I expected. It's funny because one of my coworkers, of course, I work in Atlanta, is a big Georgia fan. He sits right across from me, and he was saying how his running backs were going to run all over us, and I was like, no, your top running back won't even get 30 yards on us, and he got 27. So that was more surprising because it was more of a joke at the time. However, our defense is stout, and they definitely took Georgia out to the back of the barn and them good.
You know, I tell you what, watching that game and going into it, I said, Georgia, I like them, but a lot of what they do is very one-dimensional. You know, it's a lot of underneath passes. It's a lot of physical play at the line. And I'm like, Auburn is a really physical team. People don't realize this, and they can go toe-to-toe with Georgia. So the rankings come out last night, Ben. I'm sure you're watching it. Auburn's now ranked 6th in the college football playoff rankings. And the number 6 kind of screams a little low, but you look at the picture of it, and it's like they're 2 spots away from being in this thing. Does it feel like Auburn in the playoff is a possibility now?
Absolutely. So if you look at our next few games, of course we have ULM this week, University of Louisiana Monroe. That's really just a practice game before we get into playing the number one team in the nation.
Right.
And if Auburn can go into Jordan-Hare 2 times in 3 weeks and beat the number one team, go to the SEC title game, beat Georgia again, they're definitely a shoo-in for being in the playoff.
Oh, no, I definitely. Well, this is the thing about Auburn. It's like if you look at everything they've done, they really only have one bad loss, and that was to LSU. And even in that loss bin, they controlled that game for 3/4 of it. So, is that really a bad loss? I don't know that I would say that necessarily is. Their other loss was on the road to Clemson before Jarrett Stidham really got in a rhythm. So, like, I look at Auburn and I love what they're doing. Well, the rest of these rankings came out last night. Alabama 1, Clemson 2, Miami 3, Oklahoma 4, Wisconsin 5 is your top 5. Was there anything there that you maybe had a problem with or took issue with?
Not really. I mean, at this point, it doesn't really matter. However,
Exactly.
I would have said Alabama 1, Miami 2, Oklahoma 3, Clemson 4, because really, if you look at anyone in kind of their progression throughout the season, you can see teams that continue to get better, right? Alabama, of course, being number 1, they didn't look good on Saturday. They almost lost to Mississippi State, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but they are probably one of the best teams, at least talent-wise, in the nation.
Well, and
but
if
Miami came out crazy impressive, Oklahoma crazy impressive, Clemson not so much.
Well, and if you put the Alabama loss into perspective, Ben, I mean, they're playing on the road against a ranked opponent,
Awesome environment.
and they're missing just a plethora of linebackers.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, like that, listen, I don't think defensive players necessarily make or break a game, but when you're missing 4 key defensive players, that could certainly hurt you. And I mean, they went in there on the road and still found a way to win that game late. Like, I was really impressed with that, because I'm like, if they can win that, they could beat anybody, obviously. But I mean, Mississippi State gets every single break in the world, and they still can't find a way to beat Alabama. I was really impressed with that. Now, Clemson you weren't impressed with, but I think, and Ben, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think Clemson's got the best resume right now.
So they do play in the ACC. They were national champions last year. They definitely have a contention, and I definitely think they should be in the top 4. The way that they've won, though, they rely a lot, and they're very one-dimensional as well. They rely a lot on their quarterback. And when he's out of the game, you see their loss was because of that. Right. And so anything happens to him, I mean, even in our game against Clemson, we took him out. And when he came back in, he scored 2 rushing touchdowns, and that was the difference in the game. So
keep
one player maybe is the big difference in that team, though.
I just say, well, I mean, like the thing with Clemson though that I look at is like I don't really care. I'm not really beholden to the win thing, like close wins, because I mean Clemson last year won a bunch of close games. I mean, it felt like every single ACC game they were in was coming down to the wire. I think you're onto something with Kelly Bryant, and this is the one reason I don't hold the Syracuse loss against them. Because there's no long-term injury with Kelly Bryant. It was kind of a fluke thing in the middle of a Friday night game on the road in upstate New York where you play in a dome. Like, I think you put everything into perspective. I'm like, that's not an easy place to go win. But Ben, your note around here is our Auburn and our SEC guys. So big story right now in the SEC has been what's happening with Tennessee and Florida and these open coaching positions. So Tennessee just fired Butch Jones this past weekend. Felt like it was long overdue. And the rumor, or groomer as I should put it, is that John Gruden is considering going to Tennessee. Now, I think this is completely crazy. I just don't see this happening at all. What do you think when you hear that?
I don't see why he would leave what he's doing now. He's making a lot more money and a lot less stress. So
exactly,
stay with your commentating and enjoy your life.
Well, and here's the thing, Ben. Let's say he goes to Tennessee. Do you really think that would work? He hasn't coached in 10 years, and he's never coached college.
I mean, he'd bring in players, so it depends.
Would he?
Because Well, think about how much you have to pay that head coach. To pay Gruden, that's an expensive bill.
Oh yeah, that's
at least what he's making right now.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're not going to match, but you got to pay at least $10 million. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah, so that's $10 million you're not paying your coordinators, right? And
exactly.
So, head coach is really just like the CEO who's directing. Your coordinators are the guys who are down with the players and making sure that everything is going smoothly. I mean, if you look at Auburn's problem last year to this year, that was it. Gus was trying to be the offensive coordinator and the head coach, and it just didn't work. We brought in Chip Lindsey, and he's taken over the offensive play calling, and he's completely turned the offense around. Of course, Jarrett Stidham has helped with that. But if you look at Tennessee, they need a head coach who knows how to pick good coordinators and bring in great players. And if you're paying your head coach $10 million right off the bat, that's a lot more difficult.
Who would you, if you're the athletic director of Tennessee today, who would you hire?
You know what? If you wanted to throw just a ton of money on someone, I'd go back to James Franklin.
Really?
Because if you look at him, he took Vanderbilt and took them from nothing that they've never been in the state of Tennessee, right down the road, and made them something special. He knows how to recruit in that area. He has connections in that area. And he's done something very special at Penn State so far, too. He's made them relevant again. They haven't been relevant in years after Joe Paterno. So I think he could come in if he would leave Penn State, which is, I think he's only making like $5 million there. So you could up it to, $750 somewhere in there to drag him away, give a little bit more money to coordinators, and then set up just a great coaching position within the state of Tennessee.
Listen, I think that's a great hire. The thing about James Franklin is he's only getting paid about $5.5 million right now. If you come up to him and say, "Hey, listen, we're going to pay you $8 million," I think he would listen. But at the very least, this is the thing when I love when people go after another head coach. At the very least, you're going to force Penn State to pay him an uncomfortable amount of money. And this is why if I were Tennessee or Florida, I would maybe look at Dan Mullen, because you could either get Dan Mullen, who I think is an incredible coach, or force Mississippi State, a conference opponent, to pay him. They're going to have to match what you offer to pay him a lot more than they're comfortable with, and all of a sudden Mississippi State can't hire the coordinators they want. So
yeah,
you can kind of go ahead.
It's crazy that you're bringing up Dan Mullen, because I was thinking the same thing for Florida. Like, if I was Florida's AD, that'd be my number one pick. He did excellent things at Florida when Tebow was there. He knows the area. He has connections as well. He was offensive coordinator for a long time, and he's done fantastic things at Mississippi State. Mississippi State's not a bad team, and they showed that every game this season. The only losses they've had is to Auburn, Georgia, and Alabama this past weekend.
Yeah.
So to take a place like Starkville, Mississippi, and turn it into a pretty good football program, something's going well over there.
Oh, there's nothing in Starksville. I mean, it's like, it is, Mississippi is the deep South. You really don't get more South than Starksville, Mississippi. You're in the middle of nowhere. It's not easy to recruit there at all. I think he's done a fantastic job. Now, Ben, if I were Florida, here's what I would do. And this is kind of out of the box thinking, like your James Franklin hire to Tennessee. I'd go after Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. Because Brian Kelly, and I don't think Notre Dame is as great of a program as they used to be, because the contract at Notre Dame with NBC is not nearly as valuable as it used to be in recruiting. And so Brian Kelly, you bring him to a place like Florida, allow him to recruit the South, and he's so creative with his game planning and with his quarterback play. I think that, to me, like, you look at Saban, when does Saban struggle? When he plays good quarterbacks. You bring Brian Kelly to Florida, he can start bringing in some of these good quarterbacks. He can start training them really well. I think that would be a key to really giving Saban a tough run.
That's a really interesting hire, too. That actually brings up another thought for myself as well. What about Chip Kelly?
Well, Chip Kelly's the leader right now for that Florida job, and I think he'll get it.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. That came out today. The athletic directors put it out there in Florida that he wants Chip Kelly And the athletic director's agent,
that makes a lot of sense,
and Chip Kelly have the same agent. So I think that one is almost a done deal to this point. I think you'll hear that in a few weeks. And I told a friend at the start of the year, Chip Kelly would be coaching in the SEC before the start of next season because he started appearing on that SEC network before and after games, and I knew that's exactly where he wanted to go. So, I think Chip Kelly to Florida is going to happen. But Chip Kelly, he brings in that high-powered offense that we saw at Oregon. Can that work in the SEC?
Absolutely. That's pretty much what Florida was running when they had Tebow, except a little bit slower because Tebow's just not that athletic.
Yeah,
but the spread offense is really what Auburn's brought in the past years when Malzahn was the head coach. We're a little bit different now because we're a lot more complex. But yeah, I think especially against some of these down and dirty defenses, you can open it up with a spread offense like what Chip Kelly brings, then you can definitely score some points.
One of the things I wanted to get into, and I know we didn't talk about this before, but a couple years ago, Georgia went and fired Mark Richt, and they hired Kirby Smart. I'm looking at Mark Richt now, and I said this when he took the Miami job. I'm like, Miami's just a better job than Georgia. You can get a different caliber athlete at Miami than you can at Georgia, and
Absolutely.
that atmosphere is just a completely different vibe. I think I didn't expect it to happen this quick, but Ben, I think Miami, Mark Richt is an incredible coach. People don't realize that. Are these Georgia fans kind of regretting pushing Mark Richt out of town to bring in Kirby Smart? I like Kirby. I don't know that he'll ever be what Mark Richt has been, though.
I don't think they're regretting it. I mean, if you look at the mantra of what Georgia wants, they want to be like Alabama. And so by bringing in a Saban disciple, they've definitely gotten on that track. And I'm not going to hate on Georgia at all. They play in the East, and they own the East. And they're a fantastic team. Jake Fromm is a young guy. He's a freshman quarterback, and he took over for the quarterback who we thought was going to lead that team the entire year.
He was a Heisman candidate.
Exactly. So for him to come in, of course, they're going to lose Sonny Michel and Nick Chubb after this year, but they're still going to have a lot of talent on that team. And they could very well still, if they go and win the SEC title, make it into the playoff. They're not a bad team at all. Of course, Auburn exposed a lot of the issues they had being one-dimensional, but that doesn't make them bad. They can definitely improve.
Go ahead.
As far as Mark Richt, though, when he was let go, I was so happy that he was finally out of Georgia because Georgia never appreciated him.
Oh, no.
And he's such a great coach and a great guy. And knowing that he was from Miami, went there in college, it was such a perfect match. And I was so happy to see that happen. And the success he's had just exactly shows the kind of coach he is and the way he can, go and make the connections he had before, reconnect, and bring in some great players that they already had, and just develop them into the team they are today. And that team is so exciting to watch. I don't want to play Miami.
Oh, yeah.
However we get in there, whoever goes in, someone besides Auburn, if we make it in the playoff, we don't play Miami because that's going to be a rough game.
Well, we saw Miami play Duke on a Friday night several weeks ago, and I'm sitting there with my wife Nicole, and I just tell her, I'm like, that Miami team makes Duke look like junior high schoolers. And I mean, like, I know Duke's not like, your prototypical top 25 team, but Duke's still an FBS program with FBS players, and Miami, just on the line of scrimmage, been so much bigger than anybody Duke had on their team. It's incredible to see how big that team is. And this past weekend, we saw one thing I didn't know they had. They've got speed. That team is fast. They fly around the field. They've got multiple NFL players. Like, I think Miami, put the resume aside for a minute, if Miami gets into that playoff, they are talented enough, I think, to win this championship, to win the championship this year.
And, I mean, I think they've completed their resume here in the past couple weeks, too.
Well, you got to beat Clemson in the ACC championship. You drop that one, I don't think they're in.
That is true. But at this point, I think we'd see a lot of what we saw Saturday night when they play Clemson. They've got to do a lot of special work before they play Miami. Of course, the defense is going to be a lot better than what we saw from Notre Dame, but still, Miami's playing on another level right now.
Oh, definitely. Let's talk Iron Bowl real quick. So Iron Bowl's coming up in a couple weeks. Alabama at Auburn. We all know what happened several years ago during this game with the famous field goal return for a touchdown by the Tigers. I still think it's the most exciting finish in college football. This year, it looks like it's going to be another dandy between these squads. You look at this game, I honestly think because of Jarrett Stidham's recent play for Auburn, they've got a legitimate chance to not only just beat Alabama, but Ben, I think they could win this game anywhere between 7 to 10 points, and it sounds crazy, but physically they look the same, and Auburn's got the better quarterback. I really like Auburn's chances in this one.
And you've got to look also, where is Alabama injured and where is Auburn excelling?
Exactly.
Kerryon Johnson is one of the best running backs in the nation. He has carried the ball 30-plus times in the past 4 games, and it's been nuts. He put up 167 yards against one of the top 10 defenses against the run this past weekend. And Alabama has 4 linebackers that are injured and out. I don't know how healthy those guys can get in the next 2 weeks, but they're going to need as much in the secondary of the line as possible because our offensive line has gotten incredibly better than they used to be when they played against Clemson. If you look at them then and them now, they manhandle the line. And they open up holes that Kerryon Johnson can run through. Kerryon, if you look at his running, I don't know how much you watched him, he's very Le'Veon Bell-like. He really waits for the holes to open up and then hits them as hard as possible.
He does. He follows his blockers. He's one of the hidden treasures right now in the SEC. I really think so. And you look at this game, Ben, like what Auburn did this past weekend against Georgia, I think they can do against Alabama. Like Jalen Hurts is not going to beat you with a deep pass. He's going to beat you by driving the ball down the field. All Auburn has to do is pack 7 to 8 guys in the box to defend the run. And I don't think Alabama's going to move the ball very much against this team.
It's very possible. Alabama has a very similar offense to what Georgia has this year. Yeah. And, if we can shut down the run that they've been depending on the entire season, we can make them one-dimensional just like we did Georgia.
Well, and this has been, I would say, this is probably one of Saban's worst rosters in a really long time. Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't say necessarily roster, but as far as healthy players, yeah. He has not ever had this type of injury level within his team. One of his big offensive line is out, one of his D-line is out, a bunch of linebackers are out. They're plagued with injuries this year, and that's unlike Alabama. Of course, they've got 5-star guys to come back and fill those, but those 5-star guys don't have the level of talent, the development that the other players have. They haven't seen the playing time. And so Alabama's injuries, I don't want to say that we are going to beat Alabama because of that, but that's definitely going to play a factor into this game.
Oh, no, for sure. And I would tell viewers, watch what happens to the Vegas line on this one, because I know Vegas, one of the things they look at big is, who's got more injuries. And you're going to get an Alabama team with more injuries, a game in Auburn. Alabama has had trouble winning there before. I think there's going to be a lot of reasons to bet on Auburn in this one. One of the other things, though, Ben, is let's say Auburn wins this game, wins the Iron Bowl. Alabama won't play in the SEC championship, and they're going to drop from that ranked number 1 in the country ranking. So where does Alabama fall to? Would they fall out of the top 4 if they lost to Auburn?
So say that Wisconsin loses to Michigan this week, which I think is highly possible.
I think so, too.
Then Alabama loses to Auburn, they fall to 5. And then, depending on who wins between the ACC championship game, the player that loses that falls out, and Alabama still makes it into the playoff.
So there's potential we could get an Alabama-Auburn rematch in the 1 versus 4 spot.
I wouldn't say 1 versus 4, probably in the national title game, because I think
Really?
Auburn would probably move up to 3, and then Alabama ends up at 4, or vice versa.
Okay. Wow. Well,
That was actually, surprisingly enough, that was my preseason prediction, actually. If you go back and listen to the E2C Network, Hurry Up No Huddle, the No Huddle show that AJ and I do, we went through the entire preseason, and it's kind of funny at how close we are to potentially making kind of my prediction overall. And here's the stat for you with Alabama, too, is Nick Saban has played a 9-win Auburn team, and after this week against ULM, we'll have 9 wins 6 times. You know how many times he has won against that Auburn team?
Give it to me.
0. He's never beaten a 9-win Auburn team.
Wow.
Against us when he coached at LSU as well as when he coached at Alabama. So that right there shows there's a high probability that that trend will continue.
Wow. Listen, I think that game is going to be absolutely a blast to watch this weekend. Now, Ben, real quick, gave it to us earlier. Let my listeners know, because you guys are going to have a lot of cool content coming up before this Iron Ball. How can my listeners find out about your podcast, E2C Network?
Yeah, so you can search us really anywhere. We're really big on Facebook. On Monday nights, Kyle does a live chat. You can get in there and talk. And then our podcast specifically focuses around football, and that is No Huddle. You can look us up on iTunes, just like after I listened to our show, I was listening to CJ Sweat Show because it comes out a day later.
Hey, that's what you should do. Everybody, Ben deserves points today for giving the correct answer that I've been waiting weeks to hear Chris say. Thank you, Ben.
Absolutely, man. You did a great job on here. I really appreciate it.
Well, listen, I appreciate listening to you guys as well. If you guys want to go find them, it is E2C Network. You can find them on Facebook, and then look for the No Huddle podcast in iTunes. Ben, you're always great. Thanks for being on tonight.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
And that was Ben King. He does a lot of stuff for Auburn, does a lot of stuff for the SEC. Really appreciate him coming on tonight for us. He did a really great job. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to get to as we conclude tonight's podcast, which has been absolutely fantastic, minus Chris. He will be back for our next podcast. But what I want to get to is, so like last night we had the college basketball kind of tip-off, right? So we had Duke playing Michigan State. We had Kansas playing Kentucky. And as you guys know, Chris is a Kentucky fan. I'm a Duke fan. Hence the shirt tonight. And so I've been giving Chris a lot of crap today about how Duke is, undefeated and Kentucky's not anymore. And so it's been a lot of fun. But at this point, college basketball is completely meaningless. And what I cannot stand to hear is this morning analysts telling you everything about this Duke basketball team and why this team is definitely going to make a run and march, in the NCAA tournament, and why, Kentucky is so dependent on young guys to win, and so, they're not going to be as good in the tournament, and just stop. We did not learn anything from last night. You want to know when the college basketball season starts? After January. February 1st, wake me up when it comes to college basketball. Here's the rankings, by the way. Last year in week 2 of the season, of the teams ranked in the top 25 during the second week of the college basketball season, 5 of the top 25 didn't even make it in to the tournament. It's a 64-team tournament. 68 teams, actually. 5 didn't even get in. Of the teams ranked in the top 10, 4 of those lost in the second round or prior. Okay? So 4 of these teams 4 of the top 10 teams didn't even get in to the Sweet 16. What does that tell you? The rankings, week 2, we don't know what the season is going to behold. We don't know what's going to happen. Why is this phenomenon happening? Because you've got teams like Kentucky, like Duke, etc., that recruit these one-and-done players. They're 18 years old. That Kentucky team last night was full of a bunch of kids, and they're trying to knock off Kansas? That's not happening. So, last night, Kentucky played this really sloppy game. That Kentucky team in 3 months is going to be an experienced team with chemistry that's been coached by Calipari for multiple months. They're going to be a lot better then than they are right now. I also looked at 2015 and 2016 to see what those rankings had in store. Of the top 25 teams, 4 didn't even make it into the tournament, 68-team tournament. 4 of your top 25 teams in week 2 didn't get in. 5 of the top 25 were knocked out in the first round. Knocked out in the first round. Of the top 10, again, 4 didn't get past the second round. What does that tell you? Week 2 of the season, college basketball, we really don't know what's happening. You really don't know much. So don't take last night's game, and then tell me all of a sudden you can figure out how good Duke's going to be in the tournament and Kansas is a tournament team. Wait till February with this stuff. It's just like I said with the Patriots in the NFL. Patriots got off to that rough start, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, have you seen the Patriots? Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, they're in trouble. And I'm like, give it a break. We're like 4 weeks into the season. Now, we're approaching week 12, and who's back on top of the AFC, and I think now a lock to get into the Super Bowl? The Patriots. Any surprise? No, not really. Sometimes these things just need to break. So here's the thing I'm going to end tonight's show with, and again, thank you all for listening. There's a lot of rumors out there tonight that John Gruden may take this job at Tennessee, and Ben and I got into this a little bit. I just think fans sometimes are absolutely ridiculous. Like, fans wanted to push Mark Richt out. NFL teams now, I mean, like, the Browns are wanting to push out Hugh Jackson. Like, Browns fans, if you're a Browns fan today, tell me what in the world any other coach would have won with that roster. Like, is there really somebody that would be more successful with that roster? You're Cleveland, okay? Firing Hugh Jackson, who's coming to coach you? You're not getting anybody. You're a bad NFL job. He's done, I think, a remarkable job with that team, despite how bad you've been. That team's at least competitive. They at least show up week in and week out. Just take some time, enjoy the process, find a good quarterback. Stop being the crazy franchise that you are. And so Tennessee fans, now Tennessee fans are like, hey, we want to hire John Gruden. Okay. Let's just lay this out there first of all. So John Gruden right now is getting paid. He's the highest paid employee at ESPN right now. He really works about 30 days a year. Like a full day. Not that he doesn't go into the office other days, but his real hard working days are about 30 days a year in his office in Connecticut or on Monday Night Football. That's all he really does, okay? So you're telling me that a guy who's been doing that for 10 years, has had that type of schedule for 10 years, is going to do really, really well, working 60 hours a week, at least, going into houses in the middle of nowhere of Arkansas to get the third best running back in that state. He's going to go do that at Tennessee and be wildly successful when he's got no history of coaching in college football. Like, sometimes it just makes sense to hire the obvious yet kind of boring choice, like Dan Mullen. Dan Mullen doesn't jump off the page. He's not the sexy choice, but Dan Mullen is the smart choice. And if you want to be successful, you'll hire the smart guy. Alabama didn't get the sexy choice. Nick Saban was on his way out at Miami, about to get fired. Alabama came in and said, listen, we know you can coach at the college level, so we're going to give you the job. There were other people that Miami could have gone and hired. There were other candidates available. So Alabama could have gone and hired, but they went with the logical choice and hired Nick Saban. Sometimes, by the way, Notre Dame, Brian Kelly's available at Cincinnati. They went and hired Brian Kelly, and they didn't get rid of him after one bad season. That's the smart thing to do. Florida, when they went and hired Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer was not the sexy hire out of Utah. He was typical hire, kind of boring, and he came in and made Florida really competitive. Last year, Tom Herman, kind of a boring hire from Texas. I think he's going to turn Texas around. Sometimes it just makes sense. Find the guy who's a little bit boring but can guarantee you wins. John Gruden even if he wants the job, you're talking about such a difference in what would be required of him on a day-to-day basis. I don't know that he has that in him to transition right away. That is a completely different level. And I know he did it before, but that was 10 years ago. Like, imagine being retired for 10 years and then all of a sudden you go take an accounting job in the middle of the tax season for a struggling accounting firm. Like, that would not be an easy thing to do. So I don't foresee John Gruden taking that Tennessee job. I would go after Dan Mullen. I'd go after Brian Kelly. I love Ben's pick to go get James Franklin. A lot of these guys, whether you realize it or not, you give them $7-8 million a year, you can get them on the phone. And I think Tennessee could get James Franklin on the phone if they wanted him. I think Florida could get Brian Kelly on the phone if they wanted him, and I think he'd be a great hire. All right. Thank you guys for joining us. So we will have the Saturday 6 this week again. By the way, I do mean to brag. I'm not going to lie here. I do mean to brag. I was 6-0 last week. 6-0 last week in the Saturday 6 podcast. You want to know why you listen to that podcast? So that you can go make some money this weekend, take your girlfriend, your wife out on a nice date, go bet some of these games, listen to her podcast Saturday morning. It will show up on your iPhone. It's so easy. All you got to do, go to iTunes, download it. You can search for CJ Sweat Show or the Saturday 6 podcast, hit subscribe. It comes right to your phone Saturday morning. Listen to the picks. Get your picks in with whoever your bookie is. I'm not liable for any losses, but I can guarantee you it's a really good podcast. So we'll have that on Saturday. Appreciate you guys joining us. Have a great evening.